somebody's coming to tell us.
I don't know if they're going to.
No.
Definitely not that one.
I don't know if they're going to read it. No, they'll probably have it in here anyway since it's our holiday.
Oh, yeah, that's a mess.
The crowd is.
We tried to clean this up a little bit this morning. Look at your sentence, we had Hebrew days and method days.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, I got rid of all
Julie.
that stuff.
Hello.
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 How you doing? I'm good. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
I just wonder if Steve's on the subject or not.
That's for tomorrow.
Because he never does.
Okay.
Really? Are you saying no?
What do you want? You want some pizza? So that
Are you just a regular person?
That's correct.
No, you're a participant. You're gonna do more than observe.
We have books, blue books.
We weren't sure which.
We'll start with the blue books at 8. And I'm not sure where we're going to do cheesecake.
I usually, we've been eating around the corner there, so I think that's.
I think we can just, bring plates in here so we're cool.
Should we sit?
Because I think they like the cheesecake.
My name's
bites, so-
Adrian, right?
So what?
Is your name Adrian?
Yes.
I'm Susan. Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah,
Your name's Adrian, right?
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Good to see you again.
And I don't know if you're a Davin. I know Davin from here, maybe? This is kind of heavy. Yes, or you want
No, I think that works.
What up?
How's the house?
Don't
You're painting.
I don't think I
The outside's doing good. The outside.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Forget
It's
about
all over.
It's a little different around here.
Really?
Go away for a few days. Tear the whole place apart.
it. For the whole thing apart.
How is life at camp?
Camp is good.
Are the girls enjoying it?
Yeah, they're having a great time. Eliana, is still in gone for a few more days, and then a week from tomorrow, she'll get to go into a bunk.
For the 1 week, for the taste?
For it's 12 days, I think.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And then she will pretend she doesn't know you,
We'll see. I mean, it's interesting. Hannah says hi to us periodically.
periodically.
We ignore them unless they speak to us. I mean, Hannah, but then I guess we'll do the same with Eliana once that starts.
That's exciting when she gets to spend some time in one.
Which way do we want this facing?
Whatever's comfortable for you.
Okay. I'll do that.
A few more minutes. Maybe we can wait.
Yeah, still. I set my lunch on.
Are you still in camp time?
No, I went even farther and I put it in Newfoundland time. I overcompensated.
Should I call some?
No.
When do people ever come exactly on time?
No, we're good. We're good.
I'm good.
I get a prize?
Bingo.
You get a prize. Ding, ding, ding.
You're number 10.
Blue.
You get an extra piece of cheesecake.
Next piece.
Yeah, you can have mine.
I might take that. Eddie,
How you doing, man?
so you're holding down the row.
We're trying to have every row represented here.
That's right.
I'm just impressed that people are sitting in this row because normally people will never sit in the front row.
Not too many choices here.
It would be a small crowd.
You can't sit past the third row.
There's not so many options.
I miss Shabbat. I get an opportunity to see our new city.
Thankfully, it is only temporary, but it's functional. It works. I mean, it reminds you of what do you need? You need.
Where's the Torah?
It's in the chapel. The arcs are safe, but tomorrow we'll put it out and put it on top.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think our insurance probably wants us to keep them locked up and not just leave it on the table, even though I think it would be fine.
They got let out a lot.
I'm happy. That was better than the one.
So tomorrow it starts at 9 a.m.
Not 8, 9 a.m. for holiday.
And it's kind of like a regular service.
Right, you like
Shabbat service.
Shabbat.
Okay, so if it goes, I'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, it's
towards
funny that
service.
it's dark chocolate, but it's still dairy.
Yeah, I'm not
This is
one
what's
to
probably
guess.
manufactured in the chocolate
Yeah.
plant that's
So,
also makes, even if it's dark, they might
Well,
use a
this is
little
a good
whey or
one.
something.
it improves
Yeah, I
brain
mean-
health.
Oh, it doesn't?
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh,
I can use that.
yeah. Well, I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Tomorrow at 9, and then Thursday at 9, and then Friday.
Did you get that from
Fridays,
Mom?
No, I
Friday
actually
night will
got
be
that one
at the
from,
temple
I went to
at
a,
6.
Right.
at 6, right.
Lecture at
Yeah.
Sky today.
If you remember,
On,
yeah, that's it, yeah.
How are you gonna deal with the crowd? They gave everybody a. Probably overflow parking. Dark chocolate improved brain
I mean,
health.
because it's not the
They
like
were
pride,
giving out
weekend.
chocolate bars, you should have called.
so there's probably not out of town folks.
Okay, so they might not get a lot.
I would have sat through a lecture just for chocolate bars.
Time goes on.
We did put up
More and
our
more accepted.
micro
Some rules
calligraphy.
make there's less.
Oh, yeah.
Done in the last
Yeah,
month.
yeah, yeah.
We
Yeah.
bought a frame for it, we put it up over the weekend.
Oh,
Yeah, it's one of those things, I think it's important to remind people that,
that
they're not separate.
Of the, living room. so
and
it's-
also, but yeah, I mean, yeah, because the enthusiasm from those who really started it
All of
is,
ours.
Everything with everything, this would,
No.
everything had almonds in it.
we'll see.
Candy
I
donuts.
get it, almonds, everything, all the food had almonds in it.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
I've
Yeah,
never-
there have been a lot of nuts.
Well, usually nuts are okay, I mean, nuts are okay, but not almonds.
Not almonds?
Yeah, it's just everything had
I
almonds.
can't do that.
I think we can begin.
We'll stop talking then.
So we'll turn to page 28 and we'll rise to the bar. Wiley. Seated.
Umaveyom baby Laila, Mavdil ben Yom Laila, Adonai Tzvot Shemo, El Chai V'Kayam, Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Leolam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai, Hamarim. Ki hem chayenu ve'orech yameinu v'hem nege yomam balayla ve'avatecha tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Adonai ומלכות ורצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל הכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו עולם מי כמוך פעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות תוסף אליך מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה זיענו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי בלענה את יעקב וירום מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ברוך אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
We rise at page 34 for the Vaydevar Moshe, for the Hanukkah Kaddish, and then we turn to page 41 for the Yom Tov Amidah, adding wherever it says for a festival, the festival of Shavuot, the season of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah.
וידבר משה את מענה אדוני אל בני ישראל יתקדע ויתקדש שמי רבי ועמדי בקירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי דברי ישראל בגלו בזמן קריב אמרו אמן יהי שמירה ומברכה לעולם ולמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחו לעילה מקומתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמי רבי אלמן ואמרו אמן.
Finished your personal prayer, we turn to page 48. If you haven't finished, please continue at your own pace.
Yikana Vikana Shemerama Beavadi Ragute Yamlipotamasai Podamite Podamite Israel Bagala Vismakari Vebro Amen Esmera Amenara Yala Beamaya Ibara Vishamat Varitamina Sevita Narvita Navitana Shrilishamripo La Ela Mikovata Vishirata Tunjugata Vivata Domira Mealma Mimru Amen Tiskaba Sokurva Hamdela Israel Kadava Mohani Vishmaya Mimru Amen Yeshlamara Mavishmaya Meta Imalinu Vyaka Israel Mimru Amen O Se Shalom Ibrahma Fuya Se Shalom Alevata Israel Veimeru Amen.
Turn to page 51, Parliam.
Aleinu Shabeach Adon Avon Nazir G'Alim Ser Rishit Shelo Asad V'Zoye Aratzon Velo Zamanu K'Mishpachot Adama Shelo Asad V'Kir Ba'em Velo Radinu K'Kol Amona Anachnu Korim U'Nishtatavim Korim Lifnei Melech Hapen Avavim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'ne'eman v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shema
We remembered today Linda Rodman, Cohn, Ann Schwartz, Miller, and Eleanor Session. Tonight, we'll light the candles for Alex Kazakarov, Lawson Cook, and Saul Stein. May their memories be a blessing. Those observing a yard side or in the time of mourning, Kaddish Salon 52. Yitzgadal, Yitzgadash, Merabah. Bi'alma, Divrach, Rotei, Bi'amlech, Nachotei. B'chayachon, Bi'amachon, B'chayei Techol, Beit Yisrael. Bagalat, Guzman, Kariv, Yimro. Amen. Yitbarach, V'shabach, V'tbahar, V'tromam, V'tnaseh, V'tadar, V'talev, V'talal, Shmei Kudsha, V'rehu, La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nachamata, Davaran v'alma v'yivro. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min Shemaya, V'chaim aleinu v'al Yisrael v'yimro. Amen. Aseh shalom v'yimroma, Aseh shalom aleinu v'al Yisrael v'yimro. Amen. So here's what I think. We should look over there and see if we have little cheese baked spares, so we can bring them on plates in here, and then we can make a little bit more of a round and have a little conversation over snacks. Because everything's better with snacks.
Whiskey.
In the last year or so?
Yeah.
Okay. I need to do this.
Oh, okay.
That's I sent you a birthday party. I came back to me when your old address.
Okay,
Don't tell me now.
Yeah.
After the holiday,
Yeah.
my emails should be everywhere. So just shoot me an email with your new address, and I'll write it over to Alan, and we'll get you the birthday greeting next year.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I know we moved very suddenly, and I didn't remember how to text somebody.
No problem, not a problem. I'm glad I saw you.
Okay.
So
I wonder if it's wrong on the directory.
I have no idea. I didn't even, I thought about looking at the directory and said, Reese is always here on Shabbat, but I haven't seen you on Shabbat for a while.
Yeah.
So how was part one?
No, his address, because his birthday greeting got kicked back by the post office for wrong address.
In particular.
No, man.
And then, but I was pretty sure.
Yeah.
What's wrong with your leg? If I look throughout.
You wouldn't know. Right.
Very comfortable. I can't do that. Oh, they get my bed together. No. No.
I know it.
Like, I know that it's all there. Because it's just taken apart when we fix it up. So I know it's all there.
I just couldn't figure it out. Was there like a signal or something, or we just died
Yeah. I told me that, and I'm like, well, I'm not over here. Then you look back.
I need a problem, huh?
I just thought it
No.
No whiskey?
There's water. Water's close to whiskey.
Try the different things to make sure it passes.
I want to go to the direction.
May I ask if y'all taking a break? This is the break.
They're all right.
But we're gonna go to the next thing, but sure what?
When are you gonna be done?
We'll be done by 9:15.
I'll be back. Thank you.
I know we got late in the morning.
I mean, it depends
Thanks,
how people are going. We got more stuff out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know you are. You know you are. You're looking at it and saying, don't be guessing.
hardest part about camp is getting used to the verticals.
Oh, yeah.
After like 2 days, my watch was like, your exercise habits have changed. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Depends upon where you're staying. Like, how high up the hill.
We did move from the second floor to the first floor of Marcus because I said I needed more. The internet on the other side last year was a little bit spotty. So if I tried to do anything from the room, it didn't work.
There's some service called Echo that I think extends the internet throughout the house.
Is that your knee?
Oh, yes, I
I have it. It works.
It's swollen.
Yeah, we were having some issue and we've got
Do
it.
you, or do you have something on it?
I think that's the name of it.
Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
it
do you
is.
have something on it, like
Yeah,
a
we're in the middle of nowhere,
brace?
I mean,
No,
what's amazing is how fast the internet is.
Oh, that's
considering
fine.
they're in the middle of nowhere. They have like
That's not
gigabit
gonna
internet
help.
or something. It's like
I just got it today.
Yeah, that's, that would make it
apparently the
weaker.
town
It will.
Yeah.
made it cooperative and has
I had measles.
fiber cable.
These. I got
That's
the
Yeah,
same-
that'll make
I
it
get the same problem.
You too.
Yeah.
I don't know what it costs
I had
for
to
the
get
camp.
out, but my business is more now
You too.
on the
I
like.
think I told mine.
Yeah, a brace will, just make it weaker.
Yeah, the biggest change this year
I
is
had half 4 times
Oh,
already,
really?
but this is the
last
worst.
year
Like I've ruptured my
we got a code for the gate.
ACL.
Yeah.
They
I
changed the
ruptured
code
ACL and tore
We
my
can't open the
meniscus.
gate.
I broke my knee.
Either way.
to get in. But
To get in
From
or
a
get out.
You can get out.
therapeutic
because it opens automatically. To get
braces
in,
will
you check
actually
in down the
make
road
it weaker.
at the sheriff. There's a sheriff there now, 24/7,
I'll take
and
it
they have a
off when I
computer
get
and they look you up.
How you gonna
Do
brace
you
it?
like that?
I
You
just
think
got
it's
to
more
sleep.
secure?
Oh, okay, yeah. I walked.
Well, maybe you don't
every
like
day.
it, but does it feel more secure?
Yeah, because I walk 3 miles, 3
Yeah.
miles every day.
I think it feels more secure.
It doesn't hurt.
See, but
I
I'm
mean-
not sure. Not as long as I wear the pad. As long as I wear the pad, it's fine. I don't wear the knee pad.
Some of the
I'm-
sleeping,
Or I'm very
maybe
full
county
on
sheriffs.
3 days to make
Yeah,
it
they actually make it, make
I mean-
it it's weaker.
Right now, it's very
wearing
slow.
the sleep.
You know, I mean, the Raven County Sheriff's Department does not seem so proficient with computers. So it takes them a long time to figure out,
Check people.
you know,
When
But,
does this one come?
I would think their computer skills would be on par if their, I
Oh,
don't know,
straight
names
wood.
that,
Alright.
weapons.
But, a lot better. You keep the pillow and you too, like,
He did what hunting
Yeah,
season
that's
is
what I
coming up.
Well, you know what, you have a point.
I mean, yesterday when we left, so I left with Tom. So I went in the luggage minivan, and then then they had the like 15 passenger van that everyone that had small kids donated a booster seat to help get the. And the Israeli who was the head of Mishlachat who was driving us, apparently, I guess the last time he had gone back into camp, he had been on like a bus with Gesher or something, and so they apparently hadn't checked him back in. So it was confusing that he was trying to check out when he hadn't been checked in last. So, but everything got. We made it to the airport. All the littles made it to the airport, and everybody had a good time. So I will say. So I started this. This is, what does it mean to be Bnai Yisrael, like the children of Israel, today? And I started this around Genesis, when we were reading the Parsha of Jacob wrestling with the angel, and then I've added pieces along the way, including some poetry and some commentaries. But the question that I start with is from my teacher Neil Gilman of blessed memory. But his favorite thing to ask people was, "Who is the God that you don't believe in?" Because for a lot of people, I'll let the question sit for a second. For a lot of people, they had a vision of God as a child, and then at some point, somewhere along the way, that image breaks. And some people, gain it again through tradition and faith and prayer and all sorts of other different avenues. And other people, they stay kind of culturally Jewish, but the idea of God is still very amorphous. And so by asking, what problems do you have with your vision of God? It can help you, just as the Rambam says, the Rambam says you can't speak of God in the positive, you can only speak of God in the negative. So you cannot say that God is good, you can say that God is not evil. It's a little bit semantics.
Can this be neutral?
What?
What about you could be neutral? God is God.
Okay. Well, but in terms of trying to determine the characteristics of God from Maimonides, he argued you couldn't speak, you could only use the language that had already been said, and in the Talmud, they sort of have this argument, that different biblical figures spoke of God using different adjectives, and so you can't make up new adjectives about God that have not been mentioned in the Torah and the prophets and the writing.
Because if you do,
that you're inventing something different,
multiply people come down.
It depends how you understand God, Who was I? I was talking to someone today. Well, I won't name any names, but he said that they hadn't been in a synagogue since his bar mitzvah, and I said, well, if you come, I don't think you'll be struck down.
That was the first time I was in a synagogue.
For your bar mitzvah?
My bar mitzvah.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Wow. That's an interesting, that's not the norm.
So you can't talk about him in a good way.
Because
But you
we
can't
know
talk
enough
about
to be able
him
to
in a
describe God's attributes.
not a bad way.
What Maimonides is trying to say, and the way I'm seeing it, is that human language is inadequate to describe our Creator. And so all our puny little minds can do is to use the language that we have. And so by using the language that has been given to us, we're using language that, we've sort of approved as God appropriate, but that anytime we're trying to add on to it, there's a little bit of projection as much as there's description. Because only God really knows what God is.
Mm-hmm.
What are you saying?
Well, I think that throughout history, as man has developed more and more science and technology, all the things that we used to attribute to God, we can now say, well, let's do this and that, and this, as we learn more and more about things. So I think in that sense, God also changes in that some natural phenomenon, we think, well, that must be God doing this. We realize, well, there's a scientific explanation for this. So I think that makes God become less hard to relate God to your everyday life. God's not the one that caused the rain. It's the clouds and thunder, whatever.
Who caused the
all these
thunder?
planets and stars and things like that. So I think that does change throughout history.
I think, for some people, God gets smaller as science, but it doesn't have to be that way. As Eddie just said, who made the nature in the first place?
Right, well, having to push it back and back become further distant from what we see here.
In the Lev Shalem Siddur, around one of the Amidas, I don't remember which one, but there's like a little note from Daniel Matt, who translated a good bit of the Zohar, and then it was continued by some others, but he spent 20 years working on the Zohar at Stanford. And one of the things he said along those lines is flipping it the other way. That our ancestors didn't really understand how the sun and the moon and the stars worked in space, And, now we know and we see how, the fact that there is, that our Earth is in this habitable zone, close enough to the sun, but not so far, like that Mars is not significantly farther that way and yet is frozen, and that, Mercury and Venus are a little bit this way, and they are so incredibly hot with their greenhouse effect that, you die the second you went through the atmosphere. That it's in some ways even more of a miracle to say, okay, the sky is blue because of the reflection of the light through the clouds and the atmosphere, and to understand all of that can actually be inspiring and connecting to the divine for some, and for others it says, okay, well, God's in this little, God used to do this and now God does this and this and this.
And yet I think the more we understand about those things in science, the less we appreciate and use them. Like, before we all had Apple Watches and even, other watches, they depended on the moon and the lunar and the tides. And I mean, those were the things they used for farming. They didn't have, Hallmark calendars and Google calendars and HeapCal and,
And what's fascinating, we talk about like the 18 minutes, and then you light your candles 18 minutes before sunset. Well, they've only had, clocks with a minute hand for the last 400, 500 years. Before that, you had a sundial, and you had, there were clocks, but they were not that accurate. And so, the 18 minutes is really a relatively modern invention. Before that it was a small period of time before sunset.
Because doesn't Shabbat begin and end when the first 3 months
Let's get Risa a chance.
Oh, I was just going to say that there's a unique argument for the size and scope of God's power over things. So David Hume is a Scottish philosopher, and he made this argument against miracles. And he's like, well, we can't really say anything's a miracle. His argument's kind of epistemological. It's like, can't really argue that we know what causes a miracle, because how do you know that there's not this kind of other thing that's actually causing it that you can find, right? So that's his argument. He's like, we call it a miracle, but how do you know there's just not this controlling mechanism we haven't figured out yet? So I think that the thing is that his argument's really good, but it works in reverse too. It's like, how can you know that just because you think there's some causal interaction that you think you've measured, that there isn't some other interaction that's actually more important that's actually happening? So it's like, if you argue against miracles, so if you think every action's kind of like a miracle, then maybe every action is caused by God. So,
I see.
Just a thought.
So I've actually heard that, I don't know from whom, but that water is a perfect example of God's creative hand, in the sense that if you look at any other material, when it goes from a liquid to a solid state, the solid is heavier than the liquid. So the solid sinks. But with water, it's the opposite. When it goes from a liquid to a solid state, it actually gets lighter. So ice floats on water. Had it not been that way, we wouldn't have life on Earth, because the ice, when it got formed, would sink to the bottom of the ocean, eventually fill up, and we would literally have an ice planet.
Or the other way around, anything above the ice would evaporate and
but it just wouldn't, over time, because it would stay cold. The coldness would just stay at the bottom of the ocean, because water's an insulator as well, and it would just year after year, it would build up and build up and build up, where you would have nothing but ice.
The Mishnah, I think in Pirkei Avot actually says, that says there were 10 things created on the eve of Shabbat during creation, and what they are various biblical miracles. And so they are, because what they're saying is, yes, nature as a whole is a miracle, but that God basically created the laws of nature, and so anything that seemed outside of that had to be part of the fabric of creation itself, rather than that God was interfering later on. And in that way, there's the the argument that the miracle is not that the sea splits, or, because you can have a natural, say, the wind, you have a water spout here, a water spout here. You can create dry land in between, but the issue was you needed it at that particular moment in order for the people to cross the sea. So, Steve, you want to read the Genesis with Jacob?
Sure. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was sprained as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human and have prevailed.
So we have this, this is where the name Israel comes from, of the one who wrestles with God. And that's, the title of the piece. I think what is always fascinating to me when I talk to people of other religious traditions is that, not universally, but in many other traditions, there is the dogma of the faith, and you have to follow it. And if you don't follow it, then you become another faith. If Luther had issues with the Catholic Church, so then you had Lutheranism, and then people had issues with Luther, so then they had Methodists, and then the Methodists had issues, so then you have the Unitarian, and you have just continual schism.
How that works.
But that basically, that a particular church has a dogma, a group of beliefs that if you believe that, you stay in the church. If you don't believe that, you find one that fits your idea. And in Judaism, we have had more often the idea that we can disagree of, okay, we all can say, we don't know exactly how God works. Even the greatest rabbis and the greatest Jewish philosophers, they offer a hypothesis, but they're not saying 100%, I know this is exactly how it is. Maybe Maimonides, but he had a little bit of ego, But generally, we had this, in the Middle Ages, there was a huge debate about the corporeality of God. Like, does God have a physical body? And, most of Ashkenazi Jewry was of the opinion that, of course, God has a body. We're created in the image of God, so therefore, we're created in the image of God. The Sephardim, like the Mizrahi Jews, especially with from the Maimonidean perspective, said, no. God does not have a form. God is, beyond form. And then you have, the going from there. There's some more over there.
There's some more of these.
Yeah. And so you ended up with, you have two schools of thought that were, incredibly different, and yet neither one of them said that the others weren't Jewish anymore. They just said, we disagree on a fundamental idea about God's nature, but there was not a split. And to me, going off topic a little bit, but the most powerful statement of that was what Joseph Caro writes, the Shulchan Aruch. He writes a code of Jewish law, and he's Sephardic, and he used two Sephardic texts, and there's the Torah, the Rambam, and I'm blanking on the last one. The Rev. So two of them are Sephardic, one of them is Ashkenazi, and generally speaking, if there was a dispute, he was Sephardic. Just a few years later, almost contemporaneous, but not exactly, you have the Mapah. You have Rav Moshe Isserles sitting in Poland, and he has written a significant amount of his Code of Jewish Law. He gets a copy of the Shulchan Aruch. He could have said, oh, he beat me to press, I'm going to write a competing book. And I'm going to say, his is wrong and mine is right. But that's not what he did. He rewrote his book. And he rewrote his book as a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. And sometimes he says things, sometimes he doesn't say anything because he agrees entirely. When he disagrees, he doesn't say, this one's wrong. He says, in Poland, we do it this way. And it allowed for that dialogue to continue, which goes back, to the source itself of the idea that, in my perspective, I'm, giving away the end with the beginning, to be Bnei Yisrael is not just to be satisfied with what we've heard before, but to continue to engage with the text and engage with how we understand or not God on a significant and regular basis. So to bring this to the, I'd use this a little, that paragraph I'd used with some younger folks of, is there a moment when you feel like you were maybe not wrestling with God, but wrestling in a situation, you're looking for a promotion, you're not sure if, you're going to get it or someone else is going to get it, and you get it. What was it that helped you get it? Was it, did you go about it in, honest ways, or did you go about it through, spreading rumors about the other? I'm not asking anyone to share, but, were you doing this with a sense of, integrity? Every single day, in the Jewish, in the beginning of the Siddur, we have this sort of almost existential question. Lori, would you read where it's number 3, Ma Nachnu?
What is our life? What is our compassion? What is our righteousness? What is our salvation? What is our strength? What is our power? Ma Nomar Levanecha. What can we say in your presence? But we are your people, your children, the children of your covenant, the descendants of Abraham.
So, it's a liturgical text that is very old. I can't tell you exactly how old, but it's in a lot of manuscripts and it's a daily reminder, of we are not the most important thing in the universe at every moment. A reminder that many people could use on a regular basis. The paragraph goes on for a bit, but it ends with this idea that one of the things that makes us special is not simply our own wonderful talents or skills or compassion, all those things are great, but it's the fact that we are generation to generation to generation, Lador Vador, on and on and on, all the way back to Abraham, and all the way back to Isaac, and all the way back to Jacob, who wrestled with this angel. So I wanted to bring a contemporary poem. Yeshua November is a contemporary Orthodox poet. He is a BA and an MFA. He's taught writing. He's also studied in Lubavitch yeshivas, and so I think he's a Chabad rabbi, but that's not his. He's not really Chabad, but he studied it. So, Adrian, would you read the When Some Jews? Number 4.
The purpose of this world.
Yeah.
From God's optimism by Mishael November, contemporary Orthodox poet. When some Jews cannot explain the sorrow of their lives, they take a vow of atheism. Then everywhere they go, they curse the God they don't believe exists. But why don't they grab him by the lapels? Lapels. Pull his formless body down into this lowly world and make him explain. After all, this is the purpose of creation, to make this coarse realm a dwelling place for his presence.
And so we have like a hint of the, the mystical philosophy here. In the Zohar and then in Lurianic Kabbalah, there was this idea, that God, what was the source of evil? That that God did Simsu, contracted God's self in order to make space for the universe and creation and all that. And in that way, God also put some of God's light into these vessels. But in truth, there's nothing that can really contain God. And so those vessels broke and the light spread. Now, we would normally think that light is a good thing, right? The more you can see, the better. But sometimes there are times when too much light, you put that, even our heroes are not perfect, and you shine too much of a spotlight, sometimes they fall. But and so part of the task from a mystical perspective of a Jew is to do the mitzvot, and to letaken haolam, to tikkun olam, but not in the modern sense, but that by doing a mitzvah, it's repairing the vessels and allowing God to rejoin God's self. And so that everything that we do that's a mitzvah, we are truly changing the nature of the universe. And I find that a really beautiful philosophy. The nature of evil, it doesn't speak to me as much, but the idea that we are truly making a difference in the world by trying to do the right thing, I find very powerful. So he's saying, and ultimately, what is the end goal of that? Is that if we're all doing the mitzvahs and we're living a good life, then we're bringing God's presence back into the world in a positive way. So he's saying, how many people, when they're an atheist, are just as dogmatic as people of quote unquote faith. Because, like with Hume, you have the argument, well, it can't be this, it had to be, there's something else that we just don't understand yet. And that atheism is its own faith. It just doesn't have, except in a couple of places, there's no church or synagogue or mosque of atheism or temple.
But in order to not believe in God, you have to believe there is a God to not believe. You have to acknowledge that there's something out there.
Yeah, some say, no, there's absolutely nothing out there. What I'm saying is that is also a belief.
My father was an atheist.
And that's why your bar mitzvah was the first time in shul.
First time I was in shul.
But he still brought you to shul for a bar mitzvah.
He got bar mitzvah too.
There was...
He actually, I told the rabbi I didn't want one, and the rabbi told him I didn't want one, and the rabbi agreed that I shouldn't have one, and my father said it's not his choice. He said, you Dorchester Jews are all alike. The rabbi said that to my father. But my father was an atheist.
What I always find powerful is, how people connect or not to what they feel is their creator or not. And sometimes when people are, particularly, passionate about their atheism, in some ways, to me, it ends up being, they really desire God. They just don't have an expression. I'm not for everybody.
Yeah, he said it was when it's over, and that's it. And I said, all right, I tell you what, we'll talk about it when I die.
Yeah. I mean, Harry Houdini, was a Jew, and one of the things he and his wife spent a lot of time with was there were all these spiritualists at the time who would, charge people to talk to their relatives, and they had all sorts of elaborate tricks to get people to think that the spirits were in the room. And he and his wife, I can't remember her name, spent a lot of time debunking that and showing how all these things were fake. But so one of the things he allegedly did was he buried a sum of money, $10,000, $20,000, a lot of money, and said, if there's a way for me to communicate after I die, I'll tell you where the money is. And then you can all see that that I, then you can prove that I was wrong, you were right, that people can communicate. And as far as I know, the money has not been recovered, or at least no one's ever said where it was. So, Jonathan, if you read the Yehuda Halevi, which is a beautiful poem about our connection back and forth, but also the challenges of a world that has not always been friendly to the Jews.
My heart is in the east, yet I am in the utmost west. How can I taste the food I eat? Could it bring me any rest? The vows and oaths I've sworn, can I heed them as I must, when Zion's bound with Christian rope and I with Arab chains? It seems as easy in my eyes to leave the charms of Spain, as precious as my eyes would find the ruined temple's dust.
So he's in Muslim Spain in the supposed Golden Age, and yet he's saying even in this place of great culture and beauty and opportunity, if I could really get myself to Israel, even with nothing, that could be better than all of the trappings of the world. I mean, I just saw a colleague of mine. He and his wife were both rabbis. They made Aliyah, and he shared the picture of the house they lived in Pennsylvania with the pool and the all the things. And he said, and now we live in a little apartment in Jerusalem, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. What are the things that are it things that is most important to us? Or is it people and places and experiences? And different people have different needs and desires and hopes and dreams. Some people like a lot of luxury. Some people, it doesn't make any difference to them. Whether they're sleeping in on the floor or whether they're sleeping on the fanciest bed in the world. So I'm going to jump a little bit. So I'm just going to skip one. So at the bottom of 7, I think we're all familiar with the idea of Abraham arguing with God about Sodom and Gomorrah. And, I think most of us assume that Abraham is arguing with God, right? We assume Abraham is arguing to protect, even the smallest number of innocents. But there's actually an argument that Abraham's really arguing with himself. Because God has already decided that these people, and just as an aside to the aside, the Talmud is very, very clear as this Friday night is Pride Shabbat, that the sin of Sodom has nothing to do with sex of any sort. The sin of Sodom, according to the Talmud, is inhospitality. That they are the exact that Abraham is this master of hachnasat orchim, of welcoming guests, and that Sodom is the direct opposite of that. And there's a whole slew of midrashim of all these different ways that Sodom and Gomorrah would make anyone who came through their life miserable and leave them to starve and die in a pit and abuse the people. If someone actually fed someone coming through, they would then kill that person for
for offering hospitality. So in the rabbinic literature in the Talmud, there is all of the stories about Sodom and Gomorrah are about their inhospitality. It doesn't mention anything about what the Christian world has spent most of their time focusing on Sodom. So on the one hand, you could say that Abraham is how a question for the moment is how many civilian casualties are acceptable when you are in a military operation. God is in a military operation saying this group is dangerous. I need to get rid of them. And Abraham's saying, well, what if if there's this many casualties, I can't deal with that. If there's this many casualties, I can't deal with that. If it's just that many, I can deal with that. Fine, and go ahead, God. And that number, for Abraham it was 10. That number in different times and places has been very different. I mean, you look at the First World War and the number of civilian casualties. You look at the Second World War and look at the number of civilian casualties. You look at Vietnam. You look at Korea. The numbers are tremendous. And then you look at what Israel is doing in Gaza today, and the numbers are, no civilian should ever have to be hurt.
And define civilian.
And that's a whole other conversation. But even assuming that anyone that is theoretically a civilian is actually a civilian, which as we saw, in this, with the hostages that were just rescued, that's a challenge.
That's not a challenge at all. That was absolutely 100% completely justified.
Oh, no,
How
no,
many
no.
of those 200 people were firing RPGs, were firing machine guns, were throwing grenades? How many of the people who were killed by those RPGs, those grenades?
Well, I mean, there was a video I saw, from the IDF of somebody coming out of a hole.
I saw it.
To shoot an RPG, and they
Killed them.
They took care of that.
Killed them.
Did they kill themselves?
No.
I mean, he had already.
I didn't understand why the first few shots missed.
He wasn't sure if he was dead or not.
No, they were over his head, and then he went back into the hole. And they shot him. I guess he was right at the top of the hole.
I mean,
the
misses sometimes.
the law of proportionality,
Yeah.
right? The law of proportionality. There's an international law of proportionality, part of the Geneva Conventions, and what it says is the military objective has to be in proportion to the anticipated civilian casualties. That's the law of proportionality. So if you're attacking, for example, the leaders that were 1.7 kilometers away from the humanitarian area, there wasn't a single civilian in that area. Okay, so you don't anticipate killing any civilians. You launch the missile, you hit them, you kill them. And then some shrapnel flies off and hits their ammo depot, okay, which happens to be located in the civilian area. That was unanticipated. That's completely legal based on the law of proportionality. You didn't know the ammo depot was there, and you didn't know your shrapnel was going to go in here.
Well, I mean, and that's also not you can't plan for where shrapnel is going to fall, but it, anyway, returning to this a little bit, the idea is this is not a new question. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon, attributed to Solomon says, there's nothing new under the sun. In many ways, these same questions have been asked over and over and over from generation to generation. And again, to me, what's beautiful about the Jewish tradition is we don't say, okay, we haven't figured it out yet. We give up. We say, let's keep asking the question. My favorite, one of my favorite quotes was when, I can't remember, Izzy something won a Nobel Prize. He grew up in Brooklyn, and the New York Times interviews him when he gets the Nobel Prize in physics. I think it's physics. And they say, there were a lot of Jewish kids growing up in Brooklyn what helped you get on this path? And he said what his mother did every single day was say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? That trying always to help continue that curiosity. And to me, I don't need to argue how, Judaism to everybody in this room, but to me, that's what's beautiful about our tradition is it's continuing to wrestle with these questions from generation to generation. I mean, what is a page of Talmud? But you have the Mishnah, you have, from the first or second century, you have several generations, through the 6th or 7th century of the Talmud. Then you have Rashi from the 11th century, and you've got others from the 13th century, and then you can have commentaries on those commentaries. I ordered a book yesterday. I ordered a book today. I still have some. I'll have room on the shelf again.
I was going to say, you got lots of room for it.
And it's an Orthodox woman who is looking at women in the Talmud and showing how oftentimes if you read the story once, you totally miss the point of the story. And that you have to read it more than once in order to actually understand what it's trying to teach you. And that's the beautiful thing about reading the Torah every single week and every single year. Because you could say, oh, I read Parshat Naso last year. It's kind of boring. It's all about where the flags go and how you set up the military camp, and the whole parsha could be much easier if you just made a picture. But then, and there's the
pictures in your mind.
You got to make the picture in your mind. But this year, and this is where some of that, what's a miracle and what's not comes into play. The 4 hostages that were rescued on Shabbat, it's spelled Naso, if you took the first letter of each of their Hebrew names. And then I shared this. I mean, again, it's a little bit, is it artificial? I can't tell you for sure, but the timing matched this and then the other thing, and the
numbers.
There was some more gematria in there. I will say on a lighter gematria note, there's a super easy one, which is, what's today's date?
11.
The 11th. So what's Thursday's date?
13.
So 613, and it's Shavuot, and we're getting the Torah. So I don't normally do so much gematria, but I got a little bit on Thursday because you kind of have to. It'd be rabbinic malpractice not to know that we're on 613. And even in Europe where they do the date the other way, I think gematria you often flip things back and forth, so it works then too. But it's even easier in America. So I want to share. So you have Abraham, who maybe was arguing with God about civilian casualties, and then you have, I'm skipping over it, but Numbers. You have the daughters of Tzlofchad, who say, hey, what about us? Inheritance seems to only go through the men. Don't we get a portion? And then they do, but then the tribe sort of counterbalances a little bit, says, well, you have to marry in the tribe, so they don't get everything they want, but they're able to say to God, and say to Moses, this doesn't seem fair. I mean, that's a huge thing, to go up and say, God, I'm not sure you got this right. And our tradition says, do it. It says, argue with God. Tell God, I'm not sure this makes sense. How can we figure this out? How can we figure this out together as a community, as a people? Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev had a, I'm trying to remember exactly when he lived. I meant to put it down here. But there were pogroms. And so he wrote this poem, almost as if like a trial of God. Eric, would you read it at the bottom of page 3, number 9, and it goes on the next page.
Good morning to you, Lord, Master of the Universe. I, Levi Yitzchak, the son of Sarah of Berdichev.
And I'm just, one thing I just noticed for the first time, why you're reading things over and over. Why did he say Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, the son of Sarah, not the son of his father? But go ahead.
I come to you with a din Torah lawsuit from your people Israel. What do you want of your people Israel? What have you demanded of your people Israel? For everywhere I look, it says, say to the children of Israel, and every other verse says, speak to the children of Israel, and over, command the children of Israel. Father, sweet Father in heaven, how many nations are there in the world? A tremor passes through the auditorium, scattered sighs and muffled sobs were heard, and when he began to thunder, Persians, Babylonians, Edomites, the Russians, what do they say? That their Tsar is the only ruler of the Russians. What do they say? That their Kaiser is supreme. In the English, what do they say? That George III is sovereign. And I, Levi Yitzchak, the son of Sarah of Berdichev, say, Yiskadal, the Yiskadash, Shemei Rabbah, magnified and sanctified in thy name. And I, Levi Yitzchak, the son of Sarah of Berdichev, say, from my stand I will not waver, and from my place I shall not move, until there be an end to all this. Yiskadal, the Yiskadash, Shemei Rabbah, magnified and sanctified is only thy name.
So now we got a clearer date, because it's the 1780s and 90s and, you know, latest the first few years in 1800s, you know. But also interesting, you know, he's living in Eastern Europe. He knows who the King of England is. He knows who the Kaiser is. He knows who, you know, the Tsar of Russia. So he may be, you know, a Talmudic scholar, but he is aware of, you know, world events besides the pogroms. And what is he doing? He's yelling at God, saying, God, we got these pogroms. All these people are coming through. They're killing us. I'm telling you that you are the only king. None of these earthly rulers. And, you know, it doesn't say it explicitly, but the underlying message is, you know, where the hell are you? What are you doing? Why are we still dying here?
Country.
Because why?
Because we didn't have a country.
Okay, so why are we still dying?
We're not dying in the numbers that we were. I mean, if we didn't have a country, it wouldn't have been 1,000. It would have been 100,000. It would have been 1 million. So can I tell a little story? So a little October 7th and a little Israeli innovation. I'm going to be missing a lot of details because I didn't write any of this down. Okay, so on October 7th, Hamas knew this was a well-researched attack. They knew how the communities, where everybody was, where their safe rooms were. They knew that when they fired rockets, that everybody would go into their safe rooms, and that's where most of the people died, was in the safe rooms and in the bomb shelters. So what they would do is, you know, first they would try and open the door to the safe room. They knew where the safe rooms were. If they couldn't open the door because somebody was holding it, or they had the door handle wedged shut because they didn't have locks on the doors, because that wasn't what the safe rooms were for. They were to protect against missiles, not to protect against humans attacking them. They would then shoot at the door. Now, if the bullets penetrated the door, and then they got in that way. If the bullets didn't penetrate the door, because some of the doors were built better than others, they would launch an RPG at the door to try and blow the door open. If that didn't work, they would place a bomb by the door to blow the door open. If that didn't work, they lit the house on fire to basically smoke or burn the people out. There was a family in one of the communities, the door held up to the point that they were being burned. Their home was being burned. They were in their safe room, mother, father, and young child. And they stayed as long as they could in that room. By the time they finally opened the door to run out, the terrorists were actually gone. They found a place to hide. They hid for probably like another 4 or 5 hours before the IDF came and rescued them. The mother had burns over 60% of her body, had lung damage from the smoke inhalation. The father had 40% of his body burned. The child had 30%. There's this new Israel innovation, which you'll hear about in the next Israel Innovations, unless you want to go and read the archive and find it, which is on the CBI website, where they actually have this material now that they use for burn patients that builds literally a scaffolding on your body and allows the skin to grow over it. So they no longer have to take skin from one part of your body and put it on another part of your body. Well, this was used for the burn victims of October 7th. This woman just got her medical degree. She survived, and the doctors really didn't think she was going to survive. She survived, got her medical degree. She still had bandages on her hands, but when you looked at her, you couldn't tell. You couldn't tell.
So the last little bit I had from Elie Wiesel, and appropriate for our community with the Elie Wiesel archives coming to the Holocaust Museum. But he was asked a number of years ago,
He's been here.
Yeah, because he used to come to Eckerd every summer, which is partly or every winter. He lived in Boston. That wouldn't make sense the other way. And so, why on earth does he still believe? I want to know. I need to know. Doubt is there all the time, he says softly. The questions are there, and all my questions are stronger than all my answers. And yet you continue to wrestle with God. I continue because what's the alternative? He says. The interviewer said, well, you could walk away. And Elie says, and do what, really? Could I not believe? If I were not who I am, of course I would not. This, I like this. It's saying, to be a Jew, going back to the beginning, to be a Jew is to wrestle. To look at this and to see the world and to say, it's not the way it's supposed to be. I want to keep going no matter what. To try to make things a little bit better. So that's what I was thinking about for Shavuot. And tomorrow we will we'll be here in the morning, and then on Thursday we'll be here in the morning, and we'll have Yizkor, and then Friday night we are going on a field trip to Temple Bethel and trying Pride Shabbat together over there. See how that goes, and then we'll figure out the future. But I will say the other, my other little announcement is, in order to do the Shabbat at Sea, we need people to actually make reservations in the next few weeks. So I think the first week of July is sort of the initial deadline to decide whether it works. I mean, I guess at this point I put a deposit, so I guess I'm going on a cruise either way. But but it'd be nice if you came too. So, Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
I put them there. Oh, that's where the access was. They were right next to me. I know I put them down somewhere. Sometimes people break them home and recycle them, but unfortunately, the city of St. Petersburg makes commercial recycling impractical.
Yeah, it was my birthday weekend, but Thanksgiving weekend, the kids that come down.
We've got one interesting.
Right.
I figure we got a bunch of tourists here. We can take